You work in a region, for the more serious questions now, you work in a region where 60% of the population is under the age of 25. Now, a very large number of that group is unemployed. And I believe in Jordan, the number is up to 13% unemployment. Do you think the unemployment has been the primary factor for the anger that we've seen from these young people in the region, directed at their leaders?
Unemployment has certainly been a major factor, but there are other problems as well. And we have to be careful here to distinguish between what, for me as an economist, I would call economic problems, including unemployment, and other problems that are not directly measurable, that have to do with national pride, dignity, and things that economists don't normally look at, but which are real to most people. Let's not forget that the Jewish people set up Israel out of a feeling of persecution and not necessarily for economic purposes.
Right, okay. Uh, these young people, do you see a link between them maybe increasingly turning to a more radical view of Islam and their lack of financial but also personal opportunities in these countries?
To an extent, but let's not forget that many of these terrorists, people like Osama bin Laden, people like the alleged 9/11 hijackers, come from, if not very rich families like bin Laden himself, come from prosperous backgrounds, from reasonable backgrounds. And these are people who are not necessarily suffering from either poverty or unemployment. So let's be careful here to make the distinction between, as I said, the economic problem, and unemployment is certainly a major economic problem, and other problems that are less tangible and less economic.
Right. f- Questcope deals primarily with vulnerable Jordanian youth. But in Jordan, poverty, unemployment, and even in some cases attacks on personal freedoms is not that different to what you see in Egypt, Tunisia, etc. So, why do you think that we haven't seen the same kind of anger and uprising in Jordan? I mean, all countries are completely different, but there are some factors which are similar. What is different in Jordan?
Let's start with the Tunisian situation. Tunisia, up till the mid 1980s, was a relatively relaxed place. It was ruled by the political father of the country, then Habib Bourguiba, who was the main figure in gaining independence from France. And it was relatively relaxed. Yes, there was some corruption. Yes, there was some lack of freedom. But on the whole, people were living reasonably stress free lives, let's say. After Bourguiba was pushed out, power was taken over by policemen, literally, and they imposed a police state where people were scared and the atmosphere changed. So it was the change in Tunisia, and the change kept getting worse and worse over the years, plus rampant corruption. In Egypt, Egypt is the only Arab country that is a genuine, deep seated, and very, very well defined society, unlike, for example, Jordan or the Gulf states or even Tunisia. Egypt is an ancient place, and Egypt has a lot going for it, despite the poverty, despite other problems. Egyptians are very proud people. They're proud of their country. When Hosni Mubarak says he wants to die in Egypt, most Egyptians feel exactly the same way, and that resonates with them. Hosni Mubarak was turning Egypt into a banana republic, where the son inherits power from his father, and where the friends of the son and friends of the father own everything and control everything. And this was unacceptable to most Egyptians. And, of course, the rest followed. Jordan isn't really like that. I'm not saying we don't have problems, but first of all, Jordan is a lot smaller than Egypt. It's even smaller than Tunisia. So the scale is smaller. Second of all, our average incomes are much higher than average incomes in Egypt. Third of all, yes, we have some anti democratic practices. Yes, we do have some repression, but the situation in Jordan is not drastic. There is unemployment, there is poverty, but it isn't like many people in Jordan are suffering every day from a situation that is getting worse and worse economically, and they also feel bad in the non-economic sense of being humiliated and so forth. Jordan isn't really like that. I'm not saying we don't have problems, we have problems, but they're not acute problems. Plus, His Majesty King Abdullah dismissed the government last
Right.
week before any major explosion took place in the street. Imagine Egypt if Hosni Mubarak had dismissed his government a month ago before all this started. He probably would have helped to defuse the situation. So things in Jordan are different, and things in Jordan were handled differently. That's why I think we are relatively better off now.
Okay. You said you haven't been in Jordan in a few days, but before, when things started happening in Egypt, did you feel any kind of admiration from the people for what the Egyptian people have been doing?
There was definitely a good feeling among the average Jordanian about what was going on in Egypt, and before that, what was going on in Tunisia. The idea that people were taking their destinies into their own hands, the idea that they were opposing corruption, that they were opposing dictatorship, resonated in Jordan. It did not, however, lead to a mass uprising because, as I said a minute ago, we don't really have the acute problems that exist in Egypt and also in places like Tunisia.
What are some of the things that you're doing with your organization that can help the vulnerable youth in the Middle East? I'm not sure which countries exactly Questcope is involved in, but what are some of the main things that you do to lead them on a better path?
We have two main programs. One of them is called the mentoring program, whereby children who have certain social problems, not handicapped, not physically handicapped children, but children, for example, from broken homes, or children where one or both of the parents has a severe problem, or children who are suffering from acute poverty. We assign a volunteer adult to a child who helps the child in many different ways, including discussing problems and giving advice and so forth. This program has been applied to tens of thousands of children over the last few decades in Jordan, and it really has worked very well. It has straightened out a lot of young people. The second program, which is related to it, is non-traditional education, whereby with the Jordanian government, in coordination with the Ministry of Education in Jordan, we take kids who've dropped out of school. The kind of kids that you see in some countries standing in the middle of the street trying to sell things to people driving by. Kids who are maybe 10 or 11 years old, but who are trying to work, who are not going to school. We take them and we put them back in a special educational program that allows them to graduate with a degree that gives them a chance to study a vocation, a skill, and then later on helps to, if they want, set them up in their own business so that they can become entrepreneurs. This program is newer than the mentoring program, but it has also dealt with thousands of kids and it's working very well. We're now applying some of these programs in other countries of the region, including Syria. We also have a lot of programs of this kind for Iraqi children in Jordan. They're not Jordanian, they're Iraqi, but as you know, there are hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees or migrants in Jordan who have various problems, and we try to help the children of those families as well. We're expanding into other countries of the region, as well as I said a minute ago, Syria. We have plans to expand into various other places in the Middle East.
If not for economic reasons, why has there been this expansion in numbers of youth in the Middle East who are turning towards a more radical Islam or even a more religious Islam? What are the main contributing factors?
I'm not a Muslim myself, but I can see the point of view of a very poor person or somebody who feels that his rights have been taken away from him or he's not getting his full rights. He would resort to a power beyond that of the state, and the only power beyond the state today is religion. There's another way out for some of these kids, and that is to migrate, to leave permanently. And if you go to various Western embassies, including the US, in Amman and other capitals in the Arab world, you'll see long lines of people who are waiting to get their immigration visas and leave permanently. A little bit like the Jews coming from Europe in the last century.
Going in a different direction, I was wondering if you have any opinion about the relationship these days between Israel and Jordan. People call it a cold peace. Is that overly optimistic these days to even use the word peace? Do you feel among Jordanians an increasing anger towards Israel?
It's true to say that there is a cold peace between Jordan and Israel. And the beginning of this actually was from the very beginning of the peace process. Unfortunately, and I saw this with my own eyes in Amman and other places, the behavior of some Israelis at the time was really unacceptable. And the behavior of certain Israelis in Amman in the mid-90s was such that many Jordanians were disgusted. And
You mean Israeli citizens traveling to Jordan?
Israeli citizens and others, I'm happy to say that the vast majority of Israelis were perfectly well behaved and decent people, but a minority of Israelis behaved in a terrible manner. And then, of course, you had this incident in the late 90s where a hit squad that was sent to Jordan by an official Israeli authority, an official Israeli organization, tried to murder one of the Hamas leaders. And this was exposed, and an arrangement was made between King Hussein and the Israeli government to send these guys back. I mean, this is outrageous and completely unacceptable. And the result was that over the years, the peace between Israel and Jordan has been a very cold peace.
I was surprised because I moved recently to Israel, and I wanted to go to Petra and visit it. And I remember that many years ago I had a lot of Israeli friends who would go. And for New Year's I wanted to go and stay overnight in Petra, camp out. And many Israelis told me they wouldn't do it. They were scared. Do you feel that's justified? Could there be any aggression, or is that taking it completely disproportionately?
One of the few examples of aggression in this respect was the assassination attempt I mentioned a few minutes ago. But that was Israeli aggression against a Jordanian, not the other way around. Put in very practical terms, if you want to go to Amman tomorrow morning, you're most welcome. Nobody is going to bother you, especially as a woman. Women in the Islamic world in general, I'm not a Muslim myself, but I live in an Islamic society. Women in the Islamic world in general are protected. A Western woman might say that they are second-class citizens. That is a very debatable and very complicated issue. But the bottom line is, a Western girl walking down the street in Amman in the middle of the night has really nothing to worry about.
That's a very interesting point of view.
Okay? So that's number one. Number two, if you happen to be a dual citizen and you really are uncomfortable being an Israeli in Jordan, then carry your other passport. Don't walk around with a big Israeli flag. Don't walk around speaking about political issues in a loud voice in a way that would offend people. You should be okay. I don't think there's a serious problem.
As a Christian going around the Middle East, not only in Jordan, how are you viewed?
Because I'm an Arab, and because my family is Arab, and because I have no other passport and no other nationality, I am viewed very well by my Muslim friends in the region. Unfortunately, some people in my position feel scared. In a way, like the Israelis who go to Jordan. They're scared. Their fear is, let's say, partly at least irrational. And maybe I'm brave. I cannot judge that. I will let others judge it. Maybe I'm foolhardy. But I have survived in this region in various uncomfortable situations, in civil wars and other uprisings and so forth. And I've never thought that as a Christian I have to leave. Maybe if I left the region I'd make more money. I might even have a more comfortable life. But for me, this is my home. The region is my home, and I'm not leaving.
Well, perhaps next time I go to Jordan, I'll give you a call and make sure I'm led in the right direction if I go on my own. So it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for answering our questions. I hope you enjoy your stay in Israel. And thanks. That was Riad Al Khouri of the organization Questcope. Thanks.
Thank you.